Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior podcast. I am your host, Chrissy Pfeiffer, and I am so very excited about our special guest today. Dr. Nicole Orr is an assistant professor of medicine in the Division of Cardiology at Tufts University School of Medicine and the founder and president of Post-Acute Cardiology Care, which is her own practice that provides specialized cardiovascular consultation to high-risk patients residing in skilled nursing facilities. The mission of her practice is to reduce the burden of re-hospitalization for the vulnerable skilled nursing population with cardiovascular disease and to facilitate discharge to the community for patients admitted for short-term rehabilitation therapy. She founded her practice in 2014 and is also a mom of 3 and sometimes a singer trapped in a doctor's body. And I can also say from experience, an amazing dancer, because Nicole and I used to dance together when we were little. So I am thrilled to welcome you to the podcast, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chrissy. It's so amazing to see you.
I know it's been so long, and this is like what's amazing about, social media and technology and Facebook these days, because that's how we reconnected. And, I remember so many days spending hours of dance with you and sleepovers when we were little girls. And here we are. You are this big, amazing thought leader in cardiology, blazing the trail in this specialized population. So I certainly want to hear about that and how you got to that place, as being this thought leader and being a mom and all of that. And then we'll also talk about how it's affected you during this really crazy time. So tell us a little bit about, why did you become a doctor and how you ended up being the thought leader that you are?
Oh, wow. That's loaded. So I get that question a lot. Why did you become not so much a doctor anymore, but why a cardiologist? And I think, sort of like everything, especially, as I see people still sort of struggling to figure out what they are, what they want to be, what they want to become. I think sometimes it actually chooses you. And so I remember being drawn to medicine when I was a little girl, diagnosing myself with brain tumors every time I had a headache and searching these I think it was like Time Life encyclopedia books on healthcare that we used to get when we used to have encyclopedias. And I would come down to the table and start diagnosing myself, at Christmas with multiple ailments. And so I think, you're just sort of, you go towards what, you're called to do. And I think the heart is also musical because it sings with murmurs and beats. And so I think, there are a lot of things that I say that medicine is an amazing, rewarding thing. There's just so much value in the ability to heal someone. I think I probably would have chosen it anyway, but it just spoke to me at a very young age. So in the practice, it's very much an emerging field. So cardiology is broad. There are lots of different types of specialties in cardiology. There are cardiologists that open blocked vessels, interventional cardiologists. There are cardiologists that look at cardiac imaging studies. There are cardiologists that work with the electrical system of the heart, electrophysiologists, and then there are cardiologists that work with heart failure. And there's a very small emerging field of geriatric cardiology, which is dealing with patients that have sort of lived beyond the age of clinical trials. So we spent all of this money, tons of research, from the NIH, making people with heart disease live longer. And now we've done such a good job, they're living into their hundreds. But we cut off trial ages at age 75. So there's this whole black box of patients that are living sort of in a data-free zone. And there is a small but very growing community of cardiologists that are very interested in this population that I've been very lucky to meet and be a part of. And I've been interested in sort of figuring out how to optimize aging with treatment of heart disease and finding the right balance between optimizing function from a cardiac standpoint, but also function from a global standpoint where you're sort of not getting the side effects and the fatigue of all these medications that's supposed to make them live longer, but make them feel terrible, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so,
no, absolutely makes sense. And first, okay, before we go any further, I have to say that like secretly you're kind of like living my dream life because I have always, I was a nurse out of college and went right into the operating room and then got into pharmaceuticals and stuff like that, and ended up here. But I always wanted to be a doctor. I think I always had that sort of same drive. I just couldn't get through the math in college, actually go to med school. But so that's one thing. And my other dream is I always wanted to be a singer. And I have a daughter who sings and sings beautifully. And I'm so jealous of her all the time. So I'm a little jealous that you're the doctor and the singer and have all that going for you. But so
singing is my soul. And that keeps the big picture soul alive when you're kind of stuck in a very micro detailed life of work.
Yes.
Singing is sort of this big escape to let it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously, I mean, medicine, like you said, talk about micro details when you're dealing with someone's heart and healing someone's heart. And so I can see how singing can absolutely be an escape for you. And, as a mom, you have 3 young children. So at least, with singing, that also gives you your special escape as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
awesome. when I don't know what to do with my kids, I just sing.
That's great advice. I love that.
Well, someone told me one time, kids just, I think I put so much pressure on myself because I am such a busy, I'm so busy with work that I try to make every moment count when I'm with the kids, teaching them something, reading, making sure it's organized, giving them healthy meals, and really trying to optimize the time to be with them. But I remember there was a woman I met one time when I first moved to Darien, and I met her in a park, and she had 3 kids, and she just seemed so happy, and I felt very stressed. And I said, "What is it? What is your secret?" And she said, kids don't really care what they're doing. They just want to be with you. They just want to follow you. They just want to see who you are. It doesn't really matter to them as much as you think. So when you need to be with them, just do what makes you happy, and they'll want to be on board. And so then I said, well, why don't I just kill two birds with one stone? And when I come home, sing with them a little bit. And I'll always remember her saying that. And it really sort of opened up the door to take the pressure off of always feeling like I have to make up for lost time because I'm a busy working mom.
Wow. That is such awesome advice. And thanks for sharing that story, because it is pretty crazy when you think too about, like, you love to sing. You would think it would almost be natural to just want to come home and sing, but it took like meeting a stranger in a park and sitting next to them to kind of open that door for you. And that's, I think, just such wonderful advice. Just do what makes you happy and the kids will be happy. It's awesome. So
it's
great.
Actually, it can be that simple sometimes. No.
Yeah.
But
no, exactly. Okay. So prior to this global pandemic that we're in right now, I would absolutely label you a suburban warrior. I mean, you're a busy working mom. You have 3 kids and, doing it all. But now throw in this, horrible virus that we're all experiencing, and you're still working on the front lines and dealing with it, and actually dealing with it in, pretty much the most vulnerable population that there is. So can you tell us a little bit about how it's affected, I guess, how has it affected your practice first? And going more so like you going into work every day. What is that like for you?
It has been a process. So I don't think honestly, there haven't been any weeks since March 15th that are the same. I think the very first, when it first started, I was sort of figuring out, what do I do? Do I stay in nursing homes, or do I go volunteer in an ICU somewhere? Do I go to the hospital, or do I stay here? Because right now it's not terrible, but I ultimately made the decision to sort of stay with my patient practice from the very beginning. And most of March was actually sort of anticipatory. It was a lull, sort of fearing the worst, preparing multiple meetings, trying to figure out, how do we secure getting personal protective equipment? What are we going to do? There was the mandate, a lot of the legislative bodies were sort of discordant with the academic bodies and there were multiple different viewpoints of how to handle these patients in nursing homes. Governor Cuomo, for example, said that nursing homes can't refuse COVID patients. But while that was happening, across the river in Connecticut, it's not a river, across the highway in Connecticut, we were, still refusing COVID patients because we didn't want to have outbreaks. And ultimately, we found that it really wasn't anything related to accepting patients from hospitals that was going to contribute to the outbreak, or that did contribute to the outbreak. But we started seeing that multiple staff were working in various places, or just going home and getting exposed. So
right.
Despite our best efforts to learn from the mistakes of other nursing homes in Washington State, New York, that were having these really just absolutely devastating outbreaks, we tried in March to prevent that, and it was inevitable. So sometime in April, we started really seeing our surge here. And, it's been really hard. So it changed from, everybody being, really proactive about transferring patients when they were feeling sick to the hospital, because there were one or two cases, and really trying to, keep things the status quo. If we identified a sick patient, send them, get them help, have them admitted, stabilize them, come back, to basically just saying, it's so overwhelming for the hospitals, they can't admit them unless they're going to be intubated. And so there was a big emphasis on making a lot of the older patients comfort measures only. So we would focus mostly on treating patients in place, really doing upfront directives for meetings to get their advanced directives in place, really figure out their goals of care. A lot of patients were sort of made DNR, DNI, and do not transfer to the hospital. And with that, we quickly saw a lot of patients dying.
Yeah.
And it was variable. I mean, some patients who were older with multiple comorbidities would die within, 2 days. And then there were others that were sort of lingering around for, 3 weeks and died, a much more slower, very sad, lonely death. I think a lot of the patients with Alzheimer's, that were in the facilities that died very quickly, it's sort of a blessing that they were so confused. They didn't realize that they didn't have family support with them. But I remember one day walking in, and I think this is probably my most vivid memory of April, was, this going into this facility that I've been at for 5 years, very bustling, it's in this beautiful town in Connecticut, very, very friendly staff. I went there, it was always uplifting. And I walked in, there were no activities coordinators, there were no physical therapists. All the staff were sort of buttoned up with masks and, very just quiet. It was so quiet. And there was a huge outbreak, and so many of the patients had COVID. And it was just so quiet. And the patients were lying in bed, just so fatigued. I mean, at one point, it just looked like they were you could tell that they were this is so grim, but they were about to die. And they were just so many people that looked like corpses lying in bed. And I could hear myself think. It was so quiet and so sad that the morale among the nursing staff, the administrative staff, and the patients were just confused. They were lying there. They could barely move. They would barely answer questions. They didn't even want to watch television. And it was a really striking moment for me, the contrast, because skilled nursing facilities, they're not the same as, nursing homes for end of life care. There are these post-acute bustling places with rehab and IVs and rehabilitating people, trying to get them out the door. And it just turned into a very different place. So, and now I think we're seeing a lot of patients that have recovered, that have made it. Those that did not, have stopped sort of coming. It's less frequent now, and we're getting back to normal. But it was really tough. So I think for my practice, because it's my own practice, I sort of feared like I might not have any patients left.
Yeah.
And that's also difficult, but.
And then, so that sounds really, you painted obviously it is a very grim picture, but that is the reality. And it sounds like it went very much from, like you said, anticipatory to seeing it in reality. And, I saw that you got emotional, and which is understandable because it's like, you can only anticipate so much. And then when you actually see what is happening in person and, and feel it and are living it, I'm sure it's that much more impactful. So as you're going through all this and you're dealing with this roller coaster of emotions and treating your patients, what was it like to then have to come home to, your husband and your 3 kids at night? Like what was your mindset and your own personal emotional state after dealing with all that?
Yeah. So it's actually really interesting that you asked that, because there's a lot of, press and awareness now, both from sort of a practice administrative, hospital administrative, and also like academic interest in, mental wellness of frontline workers. And I think what I've been reading really resonates, that doctors as caretakers, we're the last to take care of ourselves, because we always have to take care of other people. And it's really hard to ask for help. And I have friends that are hounding me to respond all the time. And you feel embarrassed as a doctor saying that, okay, I'm having a rough day, because, you're still alive and you're helping people that aren't going to be, so you sort of take on the real, proverbial superhero role every day. And I think it's really evolved. Again, going back to March, I think I very quickly realized, all right, I'm going to have to be a mom. I'm going to have to be a school teacher. I'm going to have to be a very careful daughter to my 72-year-old mother who's living here. And I'm going to have to be a doctor. And I'm still going to have to, run my practice. And I might be a volunteer. And, so I knew that I had to wear a lot of different hats. And I think I approached it originally just, organizing. So I figured out the school schedule for my kids. I figured out the schedule for me. I put all my ducks in a row. and tried to just be as prepared as possible to take on multiple different roles. And I think as like, sometime probably just the last 3 weeks ago, as protocols have started falling in place, the kids have been in a groove. I figured out how to keep everybody safe. I have a routine for when I come home and disrobe and sanitize before I, interact with my family. That, as all of that sort of very type A organization planning is no longer needed, I think now I'm sort of letting all of the awareness and all of the press sink in a little bit and saying, hey, I need to slow down and check in and say, what are my pain points?
Yeah.
What are the parts of me that have been neglected? Because again, like, I will be a better mom and a better doctor if I take care of myself. And I couldn't for the last month and a half. Things are a little bit slow enough now where I should really check in and say, this is what I need in this department. This is what I need in this department. And really trying to at least give myself permission to do that, which is hard for doctors.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I think it's hard. I think it's definitely hard for doctors. I think it's hard as moms. I think it's hard as women in general, right? Like you said, I mean, overnight, you not only became the doctor and the mom, but the school teacher and making sure your mom is okay and just taking on all these different roles that you have to. And, it's not easy to ask for help. But I think at this time, it's like, we all need help. We all need support. We all need that reach out because, this is unprecedented. None of us have ever lived through anything like this. And it is so isolating and it's dividing, right? As we're learning, that everybody has their own views on what's happening and, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but it is dividing. So let me ask you, just thinking about that, being on the front line and seeing what you're seeing on a daily basis and dealing with it, what do you think is like the most common misconception that like the general public might have out there of this virus? Like, is there something that you hear and you're just like, what?
Well, I think one of the things that I think people somehow might confuse the fact that since they've been in isolation in March and April, that somehow they're not at risk anymore. But there's nothing magical about those months. Essentially, you've been really healthy, but you've not been giving yourself immunity to the virus. So you're still, it's going to be your March in June. There's nothing sort of magical about that month because, we're seeing right now a huge outbreak in the Southern Hemisphere that is probably going to be predictive of, our risk in the fall when it sort of comes back. So when this dies down. So I think there's some thought that, oh, wow, we've put in all of our time. Now we're ready. But in putting in your time, you've just been not exposed to the virus that is still the same threat that it was in March. It's just you weren't exposed.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something that there's this conception that it's like this magical period because we're in a lull right now, that the virus somehow is also in a lull. We're in a lull because of cases, but the virus is still going to do its job on any person that it affects. And the data for remdesivir was just released, and finally a peer-reviewed article that, it minimizes the time of sickness from 15 days to 11 days, and may have a trend towards decreased mortality, but it wasn't statistically significant.
Yeah.
So we're making some headway, but really not enough to say, okay, our time is over. that concerns me. It concerns me because it's very hard. There's a lot of sheltering in place and social distancing fatigue, which is very understandable. And at some point you say, what is the trade-off? Mental health versus, physical health. But it is sort of like Russian roulette, because while we have some risk prediction models of who's going to do poorly, there are also surprise cases still. It's particularly alarming is, the effect in some children.
Yeah.
Otherwise healthy people. What I do think is very helpful to know, and I sort of had a theory about this, but it wasn't supported until recently, that really the viral load is predictive. So if you get maybe a touch of the virus, like you touch a surface, that we know is probably not going to be as harmful as those healthcare workers that are intubating and get a very big viral load that overwhelms their system. So
yeah.
I think all of this social distancing and sort of, if you get sneezed on, but you're covered, it's probably going to be protective because you won't be directly, you won't be fighting a huge amount of virus that's going to replicate and continue to replicate.
Right.
That's somewhat reassuring, but I just think that I think there's still a lot of unknowns. And so I worry about that.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you. Like with everything sort of starting to open up a bit, and social distance fatigue setting in, does that concern you? And because I would think, being on the front line and seeing as many cases as you see, of course it would concern you. And then you use the term Russian roulette, which is exactly the same term I've been saying, just when I'm talking to my husband or, friends about it, because of course, we want to open up our circle a little bit and start seeing a few more people who have also been social distance and that sort of thing. But as you start to open that up too wide, or even thinking about the kids going back in fall, if there's no vaccine or cure in place, are we in a sense just giving our kids a Russian roulette game? Because I don't know. I don't have the answer, but to me, it's like that you're kind of just, yes, taking your luck, and if you get it, hoping that everything is okay, or hoping that you don't get it. But it's just it's unbelievable, and to me, like a game of Russian roulette.
Yeah, and I think the scary part is, there are a fair amount of people that we know who have had the virus, even in our town. I have friends who have had it and recovered, and they've done well. I think what's particularly concerning the medical field right now is the uncertainty about a protection of antibodies from a prior infection. Does that antibody effect wane? And if it does, when it's not sort of like lifelong immunity, like the chicken pox,
Yeah.
So there's just so much to know that I think, I loved coming down with an opinion, right? Doctors like to make a call and say, okay, you've got to do this. And that's what we're pretty good at, because you have to make life and death decisions sometimes. But I think the only thing that I can say right now is that we need to refrain from being dogmatic about anything, because we are very much on a steep learning curve still. And to come out strongly on one side and to not be cautious, and to not really continuing to examine and make informed decisions with as much data and thought and sort of planning would be foolish at best and like dangerous at worst. So we just can't. I think right now all I know is I know enough to know that I don't know.
Yeah. No, I love that, because that's what scares me the most, is that this virus is 3 months old, or however many months old it is now. And we just don't know what we don't know. Like when the media comes out and they're like, this is this and that is that. First it was don't wear masks. Now it's, wear masks. And I mean, that's the simple one, but I'm just saying when you really get into the actual medicine of it, there's just so much that we don't know. And I think for me, that's the biggest place of where it's like, hard for me to I don't look too far into the future. I try not to think about fall. I try not to think about the winter yet because I just want to get through today. But when I do start going there, that's what scares me, is because I think there's so much that we don't know between now and then that it's crazy.
I'm gonna do something really creative and bring us full circle. And one of the things, going back to geriatric cardiology and how it can actually apply to our everyday lives. And I'm just coming up with this thought right now, so working through it a little bit. But one of the things that I say, often to my patients when they've sort of outlived the clinical trials, and we don't know, say, the staple of medicine in cardiology is beta blockers. We don't really know the effect of beta blockers in some patients when they're in their 90s, right? They have terrible side effects, but they can prevent progressive disease. So one of the things that we say, and it's very sort of sexy in the geriatric literature now, is goals of care. And so we talk about, what are your goals? If your goals are to not be fatigued, then maybe we should take off this medicine. If your goals are to live forever, maybe we should keep it on. So in sort of a data-free zone, you really want to think about what are your immediate and future goals. And I think that's an approach that we should use right now for families. So if, for example, Memorial Day is coming up, if your goal is to say, I really, really need to relieve some of this social isolation, it's very bad for my family to not have the ceremonious Memorial Day, it's a big part of our memory, then you say, that's something that's really, really important to me. And then you plan and you say, I'm going to find a family that I trust. I'm going to do this safely. I'm going to have a small gathering. We're doing it with friends. We're having a little mini parade down our street, but we're going to.
It's awesome.
And that's really important to us. But if it's something that's not so important, like, okay, I really am sort of in the mood for Starbucks and don't have my mask, maybe that's not a goal worth taking a risk for. But thinking about what are the things that are most important to you, and really sort of planning ahead and saying, I need this for my mental health. And I'm willing to take this small risk, despite this maybe risk for my physical health. Because in this case, the risks outweigh the benefits, or the benefits outweigh the risk. And sort of going through every major decision, thinking about what is the end game and how important is that goal to you, and just remembering to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is awesome. I love that. What are your immediate and future goals? But really thinking about the immediate. And I love that you said that, because even with my kids, I'm trying to get them to understand that, I have older teenagers. So if they leave the house, they need a mask. And I am actually making them bring glasses too. But you have to start thinking, just like your cell phone, leave with a mask and glasses. Because if you want to go to the Starbucks drive-thru, or you have to stop at CVS, you need to start thinking about your mask as your essential. And I'm trying to explain to them, it's just about being thoughtful so that you don't get caught without it. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think it's kind of just like a little bit of a new way of thinking that we have to start kind of adapting to. And, I think opening up a little bit, being with some people, that's going to be crucial to our mental health, because you can only sustain for so long. But at the same time, like you said, risk versus reward. I think that's awesome. So I think that is an awesome place of advice to end, because I know that as we do head into Memorial Day weekend and, these summer months ahead, I think that is a question that all of us are going to probably struggle with on a daily. And we will have to come up with the answers, but, is this right? Does this feel right? And is the risk worth the reward? So it's awesome.
Absolutely.
You know what? Actually, I do want to ask you one more thing. So the healthcare workers and frontline heroes have been getting so much gratitude for everything that they've been doing, obviously, rightfully so. Is there anything else as a frontline worker that you can just say to those of us that aren't, that we could do to help, or more that we can do from outside looking in to help you and other frontline workers? So anything you can think of. I know there's been,
wow.
I mean, maybe it is just if you have a friend, call them, or, but something else that we may not be thinking of because we're not living it.
I have to say, I got a card from a friend. It was like a handwritten note sent in the mail.
Yeah.
That I have kept on my dresser. And for some reason, it's a little bit extra than a text. I'm so tired of looking at screens. And I think if you have a healthcare worker that is not going to take time for themselves, or that's just busy, they probably don't want to look at their phone anymore.
Yeah.
I have to say, I mean, I can think of probably other things, but that was the first thing that came to mind because it was just so old-fashioned, and it sort of reminded me of times past, at the same time. But it was really meaningful that someone, expressed love in a way that was like taking extra time and getting a stamp and putting it in the mail, and I thought it was very touching. And what she wrote was obviously, any chance that you can make a healthcare worker maybe weep a little bit is probably a good form of release for them.
That is so sweet. And, that's how many times do we get handwritten notes? Not very often. Right. So that's awesome. That's great advice. So anyone out there listening, if you know a doctor or a nurse or any other frontline healthcare hero that you want to do something special for, something as simple as just writing them a little note, a note of gratitude, goes a long, long way. That's really awesome. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate you sharing your real life experience with us and giving us a little bit of an insight as to what you're seeing on the front lines. And, like I said, I think you are just one badass suburban warrior.
You're probably not allowed to get these comments. I hope you don't edit it out. But I have to say, having known you when I was, how old were we? 8?
Yeah, probably like 8 to like teenagers, like early teens, right?
Yes. And being this, dancing school is so weird. And being this, the only person that one other girl, Lauren, I never know what happened to her, but to be able to find someone like you in a school where you're not friends and your level of connection at 8, to me, I'm not surprised that you grew up to build an entire platform for women to connect and feel things, because I know you've switched jobs and you're finding this now, but this is actually like the Chrissy that I saw when you were 8, just connecting from like your heart to strangers and bringing people together. And this is amazing what you're doing. And so we all owe you some gratitude.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me. I appreciate that. Thank you. Love you, girl.
Love you too, girl.
That wraps up another episode of Suburban Warrior. Join us next week. And please leave a rating and review. We love to hear your feedback. Talk to you next time.